give it a minute, or I guess I can go ahead now, really, can't I?
Right ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hello, Jennifer. It's so wonderful to have you with us today. Today we're going to be talking about Jennifer's new book, Electra. And also, of course, if anyone has any questions about Ariadne or indeed your new book coming out, then I'm sure maybe we can talk about that a little bit too. Amazing. So we're going to start off with just a few little housekeeping things. So let me see if I can click share screen. Okay. Oh my, okay. Desktop one. I guess that's that. Oh, Zoom. Oh, dear me. Hang on. Okay, hang on. Oh, hang on. I think I'm having some trouble sharing my screen, Cassandra. Yeah, hang on. It's asking me to go into settings. Maybe if I click. Nope, open system preferences. This is lovely. Nope.
Okay, I think Cassandra's saying she might be able to share it.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, yeah. Amazing. Thanks, Cassandra.
However much Zoom we have done in the past 2 years, it can still trip us up.
I know I had to do this, the Zoom share screen before. I think.
Okay. Let's see. Should be shared on my end now.
Amazing. Okay. All right. So, hello everyone. Welcome to this event with Jennifer Saint. All right, let's get started with the housekeeping. Are you okay to tap through? Okay. What is SASA? Save Ancient Studies Alliance is a charity based in the US, and our mission is to reverse the current downward trend in the study of the ancient world by engaging the public and bringing together students and scholars to share their passion for the study of the ancient world in order to inspire a vast new generation of students. And here you can just see all of our social media. I must say as well, apart from the ones you can see on the screen right now, we do also have a TikTok account now, which I actually run. So that's a bit of a personal plug there, at Save Ancient Studies. But yeah, this is our social media presence. So a few words on behavior today. Be kind and respectful. Listen and ask thoughtful questions throughout the event, and please be patient with technology and those administering it. I'm a massive technophobe, as we can tell, so thank you very much for that one, guys. SASA live events are live streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. Hello, everyone. And also, they're all recorded and archived on those platforms. So if you miss it, you'll be able to watch it afterwards. So yeah, if you enjoy today, you can tell your friends to go and watch the recordings. Okay, so if you enjoy what you're seeing today, such as we also run events such as Archeo Gaming live streams, more book clubs with lovely people like Jennifer, and reading groups. So please consider become a supporter of SASA with a monthly donation. For as little as $3 a month, you can help us save ancient studies. And you can go to our website to find out more. Okay, all right, let's get started then. Okay, so Jennifer, would you like to briefly, in your own words, summarize Electra, just for anyone who might not have read it yet?
Yeah, of course. So in Electra, the Trojan War is raging in the background, but in Electra, I tell the story of 3 women who are fighting their own battles away from the beaches of Troy, but women who have been sucked into this conflict against their will and have found that it has changed the course of their lives. And these are 3 women who I think have really been maligned in the retellings, in the treatment that they have had so far, because they are 3 powerful women driven primarily by rage and anger and a desire to reshape the world the way that they think the way that they see fit. So it follows the lives of Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, Cassandra, the priestess of Troy, the city that he besieges, and his daughter Electra.
Brilliant, thank you. So who out of these three characters did you enjoy writing from the perspective of the most?
Oh, so enjoy the
Getting
most.
straight into it,
And it's just, well, I mean, I would say that from the start, the character that I enjoyed writing the least was actually Electra herself. But as you might guess from the title, she was somebody who grew through the drafting of the story. So I really thought when I started writing, I thought that I was going to be telling Clytemnestra's story, because Clytemnestra, like I said, she's been vilified, she's been maligned, she's been kind of held up as this, particularly in contrast to Penelope, who is a very loyal, patient, faithful and devoted wife in a lot of the representations that we see. Clytemnestra is kind of the opposite. She is this nightmare to the patriarchy. She is a woman who, when left to her own devices, takes control, and she's kind of this kind of terrible warning about what might happen if you don't keep your women under very close surveillance. Because Clytemnestra, in Agamemnon's 10-year absence at war, she takes a lover, she takes the kingdom, and ultimately she is going to take her revenge on her husband. And I really felt that she was going to be my favourite, and that I was going to be telling her story, because although all of those, or kind of the way that she's been portrayed is perhaps as this very kind of vindictive, very vengeful and extremely violent woman, her rage and her anger to me has always felt like an incredibly righteous and justified anger. That Clytemnestra's actions spring from the fact that she is a grieving mother, that she has had her daughter taken from her in unimaginable, unforgivable circumstances, and she is not somebody who is going to take that lying down. She's going to she hasn't got recourse to justice in this society in the conventional way. If she wants justice, she'll have to find it herself. So I really thought that she was going to be where the heart of the book was. And I think, and a lot of the book is with her. And I very much felt that connection with her when I was writing her. But Electra really snuck up in the telling, as I kind of realised that it wasn't just Clytemnestra's story. I knew that I wanted the Trojan perspective, and bringing Cassandra in it was really, really special to me, because she's always been a favourite in Greek mythology. I think the fact that you have this woman who has got such incredible clarity of insight, who has got this rational knowledge and understanding, and can see what everybody else can't see, and yet nobody will listen to her. She's cursed never to be believed, and she can see the annihilation of her city coming, and it's such a tragic plight. And I really admire the way that she keeps on fighting to try and save her city. So to bring in Cassandra in it was really, really important to me, and to see the fall of Troy from the inside of those walls. But in the end, it was Electra really who became my favourite against all the odds, because I think Electra is one of the really most dislikable characters in Greek mythology. She's somebody, and I was trying to unpick why that is. And I really felt that while you can view Clytemnestra and Cassandra from a modern perspective, you can find that they have this real kind of resonance today, kind of from Clytemnestra's point of view, that she is a woman who absolutely, like I said, will not submit, that she will take control. And for Cassandra, I think just the feeling that there is this woman who is dismissed as hysterical and overly emotional and gaslighted into thinking that she's mad. I think, again, there's a lot of women who will feel that that is not a completely alien portrayal of women, that that's something we can recognize and relate to, that kind of treatment. But Electra felt like a truly ancient mindset. She felt like a woman who was entirely an instrument of the patriarchy, who is driven completely by her devotion to keeping the status quo as it is, this kind of sense of family honor and duty. And the fact that she idolizes a man like Agamemnon, who is, I think she's the only person in Greek mythology who has any time for Agamemnon. I think everybody dislikes Agamemnon. So to sort of get into the mindset of somebody who is so obsessed with him, who is so motivated to defend him and avenge him, I thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And so Electra was not going to be a major part of the novel, and she ended up becoming the entire novel by the end of it, because I started to really delve inside how she'd become that way, because I felt that kind of the way my understanding of her came from Aeschylus, it came from Sophocles and Euripides. And in those tragedies, she is a fully formed, she's an adult woman, and she already has these, she's already been kind of warped and twisted into what she becomes. But when I approached her from the point of view of making her a character in a novel, I had to really go backwards, and I had to really unpick, well, how on earth did she get to be that way? And that became so interesting to me, to kind of understand what could shape somebody to become, to do the kind of things that Electra ends up doing. And so really against my will, she ended up being my favorite to write.
I mean, I love that it became sort of like a journey of discovery for you as you discovered what this book was going to be about. By the sounds of it, you didn't know that she would be the titular character, did you?
No, she absolutely wasn't. The title Electra did not come until very late on in the process.
It's fascinating. Yeah, because for me, I love how you say that, she's a dislikable character, but you have that journey of finding why is she so dislikable? Why is she the way she is? Because for me, reading it as a reader, it was always kind of like almost like a shouting at the page kind of thing as you go throughout and you hear her mindset and you're like kind of like, oh, come on, really? But at the same time, I mean, yeah, it's frustrating, but at the same time, you kind of realize, oh, you have this really fully realized character who's very developed with very many sides. And I think it's beautiful that in a way she also kind of becomes her mother in a certain way. They're two very, very similar people, and in that very typical way of the daughter, perhaps she's like, no, I'm nothing like my mother. I think that's, yeah, I love that. And what are your thoughts on her youthful rationalization of her father's actions and that idealization? How did you find discovering that was going to be her motivations to become the way she is? Was there any sense of fear coming into the whole thing with creative license?
Yeah, so there always is, I think, when you are writing Greek mythology, and I really did feel this sense of trepidation approaching this story, because I mean, so I mentioned that Electra is there in Aeschylus, Sophocles and Euripides, so this is a story that has been very, very comprehensively covered, and that people are very familiar with those tragedies and the way that they unfold. And so that people will feel a sense of ownership with these myths. And so I think there's always that kind of balance, that kind of push and pull between, I want to be faithful and reverent and respectful of the material that I have, but also, why am I going to tell it if I'm not going to do something different? And to kind of hopefully show these events from a different perspective and give a different kind of insight into what these myths could be and what these stories could mean, and why they might be something that we want to still read today as well. And so when it came to making Electra up, because there had to be a huge amount of creative license, because there wasn't anything about her childhood. I think it makes her incredible to imagine what this must have been like on stage, that she must have been like Clytemnestra in Aeschylus' Agamemnon, a real force of nature, like a really compelling, dramatic, bloodthirsty character. But if you are trying to get into that person's mind to write from their perspective in a novel, then you have to have something else. You have to kind of layer that story. And so I found that Euripides' portrayal of her was, there were these hints, these almost kind of clues about where I could go, that I wasn't just kind of sketching a story from nothing to work out who Electra might have been. And so for example, where in the play she's been married off to a peasant who doesn't get a name in the play. He's a noble peasant, like he's as in, although he's got these very humble origins, he's immensely respectful of Electra and very supportive of what she's going to do. And so although Clytemnestra and Odysseus have married her off to sort of humiliate her and render her powerless, so that she's not married to somebody with wealth and resources, she's not going to be able to raise an army. So they've done this to kind of trap Electra, but the man that they've married her off to is not going to make it a real marriage. He's not going to force himself on Electra. And so I thought, so there we have an idea that somebody views Electra in a sympathetic way, that there is somebody who can see her as a good person and a person who's worth supporting. And so I kind of took that character and introduced him earlier into Electra's life, so kind of greatly expanded his role in Electra's life, because I thought we need to see her from some other angles. We need to see her from some other perspectives, not just the vengeful woman that she has become. We need to see somebody who likes her and see her through those eyes, because that way we are going to end up with somebody who is actually a fully rounded human being. So that was invented, but I felt like, well, it has its root. So, there is a reason to kind of introduce this character and have him there, and it's not something that's kind of plucked completely out of midair. And I think that you can always, when you are looking at Greek mythology, you can always be a little bit creative with the timeline, because there is no timeline and there is no comprehensible chronology to Greek myth ever, and people's ages are extremely fluid and vague. And so I thought, to kind of understand Electra as somebody who is devoted to her father, I can't have her as somebody who really, really knew what he was like. And so he has to go when she is young, when she's young enough that absence of her father in her life is going to be something that she can blame everything going wrong on. Because from a child's perspective, she can't absorb the complexity of the sacrifice of Iphigenia, of the complicated family dynamics, of everything that's gone before. She can understand it as in, my father has gone away and everything has gone wrong and my life is unhappy. And if only he would come back, everything would be okay. And she has to idolize Agamemnon and mythologize him in her own mind. I think in order to love him the way that she does.
Because it really does become a delusional obsession, wouldn't you say, by the end of the book? And even after everything that happens, it's fascinating, but you really do watch it as it builds up and goes along from the start. I think for me as well, reading it, I found the older sister Chrysothemis to almost be a bit of a measuring stick against that, would you say? She's a bit older, she's a little bit less kind of in that idealized kind of set, perhaps because she can understand the events a little bit more. Would you say that?
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry. Oh no, you. What was your? Did you have any intention specifically for Chrysothemis as a character? Because of course she does kind of like disappear halfway through. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I think it's always, I'm always interested in sisterly relationships in these novels. So between Clytemnestra and Helen as well is another one. Because again, I think we're quite used to seeing these women just through the lens of the men that they are attached to, involved with, that their stories revolve around. And so we see Electra in relation to her brother Orestes, and we see her in relation to her feelings for Agamemnon. But I really wanted to see her as a sister as well. And I think Chrysothemis was really useful in that it gives you that other option. There's a real sense of inevitability in a tragedy, in the unfolding events of a tragedy. And I was so interested in the sense that this is also a family that has been cursed by the gods through multiple generations, that they are kind of trapped in this cycle whereby they keep committing this violence against one another and angering the gods more and more. And everybody keeps on going, making things worse and worse with every generation. But so it feels almost as though they have no choice, but they do. And I thought that Chrysothemis was very useful to serve as a foil to Electra, to show that actually there is another option. Things do not have to go the way that they go. Chrysothemis handles things very, very differently, but she's been through the same experience as Electra. She's lost her sister, she's lost her father, she's lived in that same palace with Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, but she is not driven down the same road as Electra is. And so I really wanted to have that balance and to say, actually, these, when you are writing about the gods, when you have the gods in a story, you can feel almost as though everybody is a puppet. and everybody's actions have been predetermined. And I really like the tension between how much of this is fate and how much of this is human beings making the mistakes that human beings make. So I thought that having Chrysothemis there very clearly as somebody who makes a different choice and takes a different road shows us Electra could have done something different as well.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I'm going to backpedal a little bit back to our discussion of the whole ancient myth thing, because the actual events of the Electra play as we have it, they all take place, of course, it's a Greek tragedy in one day. And the novel, I think it's just the last chapter or so, really, that the that where that does happen. And it really must span, you talk about timescale, it must span about like 20 years, that book, really.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just, I guess it does go to show all of the kind of like thought that goes into it. But I guess as well, if you originally want Clytemnestra to be a big character, that those 20 years play a lot more into the body of that as well. When you wanted to make it more about Electra, was that any concern that you had, or did you think that having that final kind of climax in the one day just allowed for the rest of the novel to really focus on that kind of build up and that development?
Yeah, for me, it was so much that everything builds to that final moment, and those final and that final decision rests with Electra. And so it felt that that the events of the novel kind of span those decades, but it also reaches further back into the past, because we go back to Agamemnon's ancestors and we go back to the crimes of Tantalus, of Pelops. Hang on, yes, Pelops. So there's so many names to keep track of, and so. And so it feels that in the end, everyone's trying to break the cycle, but in the end, Electra is the only person who can do it. So I did really like that sense that we are building over this kind of long, slow period. And it's similar to the Trojan War, that there are these 10 years, but they build up in the end to actually something that means it's over very quickly when it happens.
And that almost has an element of shock, and kind of you finish the book and you're kind of sitting there like, wow, what happened? That's it. Wow. It's like you're seeing like the dust kind of settle, and it's that it really, I mean, yeah, it somehow you still get that same shock that you get in that tragedy. If you're watching a tragedy over a space of one day, you still get that, even though you've just read this immense long story, which is essentially about like these family relationships and ancestral power. It's fascinating. And to backpedal again a little bit, you spoke about the relationship between having mortals and immortals in a book, and of course that's always been a big theme across all of your books, really. Of course, in Ariadne, that's also very important. I'd love to ask you, how important was that a factor with the story of Electra? Because I know it, of course, it has a big impact in Cassandra's life, but beyond the idea of the Furies and the Fates, this is very much a story focused on families and the home. So did you feel perhaps the gods almost taking a step back in this narrative?
Yeah, they feel more detached in this story. And so I made a deliberate choice again that the only time that we actually see somebody interact with a god, it's through the eyes of Cassandra. And Cassandra is, of course, this unreliable narrator, in that Apollo drives her mad, or does she become mad? And as everybody wants her to believe that she is mad and that what she says cannot be believed. So to what extent can the reader believe what Cassandra is saying? And how much can Cassandra believe it herself? Because I think there is that sense, if everybody is telling you that you are wrong for 10 years, how on earth do you hold on to that sense of yourself and the truth? And it obviously really fragments Cassandra's mind and puts her under this unbearable strain. And so I wanted her to have the only direct encounter with a god, because that really, I think, adds a dimension of terror to the gods, which you really feel in the myth cycles around the Trojan War, that the gods are causing so much devastation, that they are unleashing chaos and destruction. And this war obviously Helen takes the blame for it narratively so many times, this one woman, because she's just too beautiful. And so, who can help themselves? Let's just blame it all on Helen. But it goes back to the gods choosing to have a war because they want one for their own purposes. And this sense that they are playing with human lives in such a cold and callous way. They do feel very removed from the story. They are not emotionally involved in this the way that they really are in Ariadne. Her life is so intimately entwined with Dionysus's that when it comes to the Trojan War, you really feel that distance, and it makes them so much more terrifying. So I wanted to have that sense in Electra of this menace that you can't quite identify, and you can't quite touch it, and you can't quite trust yourself when you come into contact with it, but it is there.
And it's interesting, it really is the human perspective of faith and belief in a myth where it's kind of almost constantly accepted by society today that the gods are in this myth. It's interesting to have that element of uncertainty and fear kind of injected back into it, I suppose. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's interesting you say that though, because I thought, is it just me? I might have been remembering this wrong, but does Electra not see the Furies on the rooftop at the end? Or is that maybe a little kind of up for debate that?
Yeah, I think because, so you are right, I included that in there. Because I think the Furies are so interesting because they are the manifestation of a guilty conscience, and the way that they plague and torment the sufferers. I think that you can just see them so very much as a metaphor that I think in Electra's kind of heightened state, it was similar to Cassandra's encounter with Apollo, that is she really seeing this? Is this really happening? And they disappear from her, and they just inflict themselves on Orestes, because Electra doesn't really take the guilt upon herself. Her violence is committed by proxy. She very much engineers it, but she doesn't actually commit it herself. And I think she enables herself to kind of sidestep that torment in many ways as well. So that was really kind of about Electra's state of mind, about that moment where she really thinks, can I go ahead with this? Is this the right thing to do? And she thinks, yes, it is.
Wow. That's really interesting. And speaking of guilt with Orestes, really burgeoning all of that guilt, there's a lot of that, I suppose, because he never meets his father, right? Everything that he's told about him is told to him by Electra, essentially. And then of course he doesn't even have Electra there for a lot of his life, so he kind of comes back. And would you say he's kind of has these moments of thinking like, why am I even doing this? Like, should I even do this? So guilt kind of must play a heavy conscience on his mind. Was that something that was difficult for you to narrate, or were you always like sure that it would be that kind of way with that kind of fear? And how uncertain is your Orestes?
Well, I think because you mentioned before how much Electra is similar to Clytemnestra and how much she would absolutely revolt against that idea, and which I think is, although it's played out on this very extreme level, that is such a recognizable mother and daughter or parent and child dynamic. And the two of them are too similar, and they're both too driven to understand ever where the other one is coming from. But I felt that working out Clytemnestra's relationship with Electra and Orestes, and therefore who Electra and Orestes would be, was, I think, the most difficult part of planning the novel and kind of working out how the story could unfold in this sequence of events that is predetermined, because I did kind of stick overall to the events of the story as we have them. So because I said that Clytemnestra is driven, as far as I can see her, by her grief as a mother, that it is Iphigenia's death is the catalyst for who she becomes, and everything she does stems from her love for Iphigenia. But then things have gone so horribly wrong with her other children that they end up wanting to murder her. And so you wonder, this on the one hand, you have an incredibly devoted mother, but you have a mother where things have just, her relationship with her other children has gone as badly as it could possibly go. And so how on earth do you reconcile those two things? And so Clytemnestra I felt really she had to be separated from Orestes from a younger age. She had to lose him when he was still a child, because her alienation from Elektra was like an emotional alienation. But to have Orestes feel the same, I think Elektra is the way she is because she is her mother's daughter through and through. So Orestes then had to be somebody who could be manipulated by Elektra. And he had to be somebody who was not with Clytemnestra, because otherwise I felt all the time, this is a woman who really loves her children. She is going to try to make peace with them. And so that was the only way I felt really to handle Orestes, to have him gone and to have him carry that weight of the family name and the family honor, and that responsibility that he feels he owes to his father, because that is such a heavy burden for him to carry. And he's very much torn, because in order to kind of to do what seems right on the one hand, his father has been murdered. And in this kind of society, you do have the right to take your revenge on your father's murderer, but your father's murderer is your mother. And that's the worst thing that you can do. So he is put in a really impossible situation. And I think he just doesn't have the strength. Whereas you can see somebody like Clytemnestra, somebody like Electra can cut right through that tangle. Orestes just isn't able to do that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And talking, I'm going to pause for a minute here, actually, just to say to everyone, we're going to keep talking for a little bit longer, and then we're going to open up the floor to ask all of your questions. So please do comment any questions that you have for Jennifer, so that we can make sure we get through them all. Amazing. Okay, so it's really fascinating that you talk about Clytemnestra as a mother being first and foremost. It reminds me of this imagery that you use, where her maternal instincts almost at some point kind of become synonymous with her sense for revenge and her need for revenge and her obsession. I think towards the end there was this wonderful bit I remember reading where she feels her revenge rotting in her womb, almost like, and it's kind of described as being seated in her womb, almost like you can really tell where this journey that she's been on, that started off as maternal grief for the loss of her daughter, has become so obsessive, and it's just really has just almost been poisoned by this hatred as it just goes on and on and on. So it is unrecognizable. What started off as just love has become hate. And that rotting imagery, I just love that, to be honest. It's not a question. I just wanted to say I think it's a really brilliant way of doing it, and it really, yeah, it's visceral, literally. I think it's lovely. So on the topic of her maternal instincts, after Orestes is born, this is kind of like just sort of something I was sort of wondering, do you think that Clytemnestra gets postnatal distress? Because
yeah,
he is born literally right after the death of the other child.
Yeah, which again, that was a deliberate choice that I made, to have Orestes born at that moment, because I think that there are versions where he's born before Iphigenia is killed, and these are the things I think you do have that creative license to shift these events around, and that really made sense to me, that when she has suffered the loss of her daughter, it is the most horrific pain that a mother can experience. And so I really kind of understand that fear, that opening yourself up to that much love for a child also opens you up to the corresponding amount of pain and heartbreak, which is unfathomable in its depth and the torment. And so for her to then have another baby so soon after Iphigenia is lost to her becomes something just utterly, utterly terrifying. And I think that there is just that instinct to try to protect yourself from feeling that grief and feeling that pain again. And I think I come back to this when I write about motherhood in the ancient world, because it's something where it is such a dangerous thing for women to undergo in that part of history, well, in so much of history until fairly recently, and it is something that women wouldn't have had the same kind of choice and control over as well. And so I am always interested in what effect that must have psychologically to face birth and motherhood with this knowledge that so many children just do not survive, so many women don't survive. But the pain isn't less, because I think we talk about infant mortality, and we talk about these about these kinds of losses happening in history as something that's so commonplace that it almost gets glossed over, but it would never be that way, however common it might be and however many times somebody might experience it. It would always be this terrible heartbreak. It would always be devastating. And so it's something I find that's kind of a theme that I do come back to in my writing, kind of how motherhood feels in a world like this.
Yeah, and it all is, the female emotional perspective. You love to take that on these myths that usually are about the brave deeds of men, reorient them within the female perspective, and to really, as you say, get this completely human emotional thought on it. I mean, it's so lovely to remember that these myths at the end of the day are about people and the human experience, and I think that's why they're still so popular today. But this is something, especially the perspective of women, that we're seeing a lot more at the moment in myth retellings. It's a very popular trend that we're seeing with new books about the ancient world coming out, not just from yourself, but from people like Madeline Miller and Natalie Haynes. I'm sure you love all of these things that are completely, do you think that having this as a sense of popularity, how does that fact play into your mindset when you're writing? Because it is almost like it's the next kind of step of like classical reception, this very like new trend, which is very important today. Do you ever feel like you have to like engage with that in itself, or does it just generally flow, or do you perhaps feel like you're leading the helm with these trends?
I mean, it's one of those things, I think, that you get these like you get these kind of waves that come forward, and you don't really realize that you're being swept along in it until you sort of take that step back and look. So I think that writing Greek mythology, because I have always really loved Greek mythology, and I was always told those stories and read those stories when I was a child, and then I came to read them to my own children. And it was really that feeling of when I was reading them to my sons, and we started to kind of I started to question them a little bit more, and in fact, so did they. So my son asked me when we were reading Theseus and the Minotaur, "Oh, is there anything more about Ariadne? Like, what did she do next? And what was it? What did she go on to do? Because she just disappears out of that story, having been so absolutely pivotal to Theseus's success." And so I thought, well, I know there's more about Ariadne, and I would want to read that story, so I'm going to write it. And I think that's a really crucial thing when you're writing, is to write something that you want to read, is to kind of, you are looking for a story and you don't find it the way that you want to read it, and so you tell it yourself. And I think that a lot of us are doing that, and I think that there's really this moment culturally, there has been things like the Me Too movement, there has been this kind of great wave of women's voices being heard, and it's not just in ancient mythology. People are approaching all periods of historical fiction from the perspective of, look, women did some really interesting things, and their stories are really, really important. And when they're lost, we lose something. We just lose this whole other perspective and all of these other layers that really enrich our experience of the thing that we love. So if we love Greek mythology, then we are going to enjoy exploring it from these different angles, and to see the spotlight shone on different characters and people whose perspectives perhaps haven't been heard in the same way before. So I think that I can completely understand why there's an appetite for it, because I'm consuming these stories and I really want to read them too. So yes, I think it's great. And as for kind of how aware of it am I when I'm writing, I think the thing to keep in mind is this something I want to read? And as long, whatever you're writing, as long as you have that feeling, then I think that you are on the right track. But you can't really allow yourself to think, am I keeping abreast of market trends? Because that's kind of the enemy of creativity. You have to write what you love.
It's always like going back to the whole creative license thing as well. I mean, if you're like if you've studied this stuff, and B, if you've got that kind of commercial mindset gnawing in the back of your head, it can be really difficult to kind of just go with the flow sometimes, I suppose. Yeah, really fascinating. It's as well, it's exactly what you said about Clytemnestra being this tour de force who, is trying to screw over the patriarchy, exactly that kind of thing. What a great character, her and Electra, to choose for this kind of topic. So no questions have come in yet as of yet, but if and when they do, I'll put them here, Cassandra says. Okay, my dad is watching in the next room, and technophobe that he actually has written down his questions on a piece of paper.
Amazing.
So we've got a couple questions, guys. Okay. Hello, actually, okay. Greek myths are often firmly rooted in the physical landscape. How important is this to you in your writing?
No, that is a really great question, and I don't think I've been asked that before at all. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Go on.
Yeah, so because I think that for me as well, this is part of the way that the gods manifest as these kind of like natural phenomena as well, which is part of what makes them so terrifying and unpredictable, that you have Poseidon, the sea, earthquakes, Zeus, thunder, etc. So it's all kind of magic, and reality is so very closely interlinked, and I find that a really satisfying place to write, because I think that you have this incredible license for creativity and for imagination, and whilst also you are kind of grounding it in this recognizable reality, and that's one of the things that makes it so incredibly appealing. So creating that kind of physical setting and the world around them is part of what I enjoy doing the most. Is the world building, and I've particularly enjoyed it. I think like we might talk a little bit about my next book as well, and that's kind of the obvious segue for me, because in my next novel, Artemis is a really major character. And Artemis is very much associated with the woods and the wild. And so to be able to go into that kind of landscape, to be able to kind of step outside of the kind of the rigid social hierarchies of the palaces, of the cities, and to actually go into a more unconstrained part of this world has been, I think, just really, really enjoyable and really magical to create around me. So I love the fact that you do get these different kinds of landscapes to explore, and the way that they are always part of the story, and so it's always kind of part of the actual events. And in Elektra, if I'd like talk a bit about the book I'm supposed to be talking about rather than there was really the sense of being within Troy, within the walls of this besieged city. I was writing during lockdown, and so that claustrophobic intensity felt as it was an escape from lockdown, but it also felt very much kind of informed by what was going on around us. So I love the fact that you can still find the connections in these very distant worlds as well.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's really that's brilliant. Okay, and how does Greek myth help us to understand our place in the world, and what is its relevance in society today? That's a very big question. I think we talked a little bit about that with the whole feminist perspective, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge question. I'll try and answer it. It's it is the reason that mythology, because people do kind of ask that kind of, why Greek mythology, why now? And I would say, like, it's not just now. We have these stories have survived for thousands of years, and these stories were passed down like without, you know, through the oral tradition for centuries before anybody was writing them down and recording them. And these stories survive for a reason, and that reason has got to be that they tell us something about ourselves and our own lives. And I think there is something really in the fact that they are fantastical, and that they are very extreme situations where you have that blend of, this is fantasy, and this is kind of a safe way to explore these emotions that everybody has to face. And so they do raise questions about mortality and grief and love and heartbreak and hope and family relationships and family dynamics that we absolutely recognize and see ourselves in. But we are able to experience, I think, you know, that idea of catharsis, of going to watch a tragedy, of seeing something like this play out in front of you and experiencing those emotions and sharing them with the people around you, because storytelling is not something that we do in isolation. Even when we are reading a novel in a room on our own, we are sharing that with the author, and the author is sharing that with us. That we always have a human connection in passing stories on to one another. And so there is always that feeling of, I am not the only person who has experienced this. I'm not the only person who is afraid of this, or who has suffered this, or who hopes for this. This is something that people have been writing about and talking about and singing about for hundreds, for thousands of years. And so while we might think that so much has changed and so much is different between now and the Bronze Age, there is that just shared humanity. And I think that is a real piece of magic, that we really do have that shared chain that passes down through the centuries.
Oh, that was beautifully put. Enough to bring a tear to the eye. That's why we love this kind of stuff. That's why we need to save ancient studies.
Very nicely linked.
Oh yeah. That, you know. Still no questions, but I have a question. The Electra Complex, that's something. There are a few moments in your book where I really, you know, I kind of had to put the book down. I was like, whoa. It was very subtle and very well done. Electra, is she in love with her father?
I mean, so I think to make this bearable, there has to be that distance between Electra and her father, as in, he is not really a real person to her. He is everything that she imagines that she wants in her life. And she is a teenage girl, and she is extremely confused, and she is extremely damaged. And Agamemnon becomes, I think, yeah, everything that she wants. So she wants a father, but she is also, I guess he kind of plays a role in her imagination of every kind of man that she wants in her life. And so, yes, I wanted to handle that extremely delicately, because you don't want to go into the realms of, you know, truly and deeply disturbing. But I definitely felt that, yeah, when she is imagining her father and the fact that he takes these women as prisoner on the battlefield, part of her is wishing that was her. And that's partly because she just wants to be with her father, but it's partly because she is lacking so much in her life that she is pinning everything on this man, on Agamemnon. And she doesn't know him, and she has got no kind of, beyond like a few memories, childhood memories, he's not really a real person. It's what he comes to represent for her.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah. Because I do remember I read it and I thought, well, I mean, she wants to be the slave, like, no, okay, it's clearly an extent of delusion, but it is, I suppose it is one of those things where it's almost like having like a poster of your favorite celebrity on your wall growing up, maybe, in a very weird kind of way.
She's extremely damaged.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And let me think if I got any other kind of questions that are quite interesting buzzwords. Yeah. So Clytemnestra's relationship with her sister, we touched on very briefly, that siblings and female siblings is a recurring thing that you're interested in exploring. And I thought, to me it's a very complex relationship that they have. She defends Helen. She hates the way that these men are talking about her, blaming her for the war, but she also kind of resents her to a certain extent after what happens to her daughter. Should we talk a little bit about that, go into that a bit more, because I thought that was something we never really hear about in myth, their relationship.
Yeah, sisters. And again, and I did the same with Ariadne and Phaedra. I felt the same about these two sets of sisters, where they are both incredibly famous women in mythology, but you very rarely see them together. I mean, I've never seen Ariadne and Phaedra together in any kind of like ancient representation. That kind of, they reference one another, but I hadn't seen them as sisters, and that was something I so wanted to explore, kind of growing up with that shared childhood of the Minotaur. And it was very much the same when it came to Clytemnestra and Helen, because it's so interesting that they are these two Spartan girls, but Helen has got this incredible mythology attached to her, that she's the daughter of Zeus, and so she occupies this more special exalted space. And then the suitors all come for Helen, and Clytemnestra, who would be, somebody of great status and worth and value herself, she is always going to come second to her sister. But I didn't want it to just be a straightforward story of jealousy, because I think that women are often reduced to these kind of, well, not just women, but particularly women, reduced to these kind of, very single-minded stereotypes. So you would have like two sisters and one of them is just jealous, and that's all there is to it. And then she grows up to be like an evil, terrible wife, and she occupies this other space of kind of this other kind of archetype. And so I wanted there to be more to it, and for them to have a genuine affectionate relationship like you do with sisters, that you love them and you hate them, and there's all kinds of things in between as you grow up, and very complicated feelings. But it definitely does become more complex, because whatever happens with Helen, whether she chooses to go, whether she's taken against her will, she leaves her daughter behind in Sparta when she goes to Troy, but she gets to come home to her at the end. Whereas what Clytemnestra loses her daughter because of Helen's decision or not, we don't really know, and she'll never see Iphigenia again. And that has got to add another dimension of complexity to that relationship, which I thought made it more intriguing to investigate and explore a little bit more deeply.
Yeah. Yeah, because as well, like, yeah, that did she not kind of mysticism? There's a lot of that with Helen's character, isn't there?
Yeah. And I think there has been so much about Helen, that she's the catalyst for all of these things going wrong. I really wanted to preserve a little bit of agency for Helen in the novel, and kind of a little bit of kind of, it doesn't really matter whether she went by choice or not. It's what she made of her life before and afterwards. I think I saw a question just pop up.
Oh, yes, right. Yes, we've got from Cassandra. Okay, so what inspired you to begin retelling Greek myths? Why Greece? Can you see yourself exploring other cultures in a similar way? Oh.
So it really had to be Greek mythology for me, because that is the thing that I have been obsessed with since as long as I can remember. So my parents used to take us on holiday because we had we knew they had friends who lived in Cyprus. So one of my earliest memories is standing in the big theatre in Kourion and looking around, and I just think I have always just felt that fascination with ancient Greece and ancient Greek mythology, and my son is very interested in all kinds of mythology, so he will always be saying, why don't you write some Norse mythology, why don't you write some Polynesian mythology? And I think there is something where I'm so interested in all these other types of mythology and so interested in him, in what he has to tell me, and he's so keen to learn and to share it. But Greek mythology is what I know and love, and I feel that it very much informs our culture and our history, and kind of shapes our experience of storytelling in so many ways as well. But other myths, I think I'm very interested in reading other people's interpretations of them, but it is probably not for me to tell those stories, I think.
Oh, as the saying goes, write what you know.
Yes. Definitely.
If there was one that you could write about, is there anything that particularly appeals to you?
Yeah, I really do enjoy kind of reading things about British folklore. I would massively recommend actually Lucy Holland's novel Sister Song, which is based on a British folklore ballad. And so that one is fascinating, and just really that's a story all about sisters and complicated sibling dynamics, which is built to this incredible I don't want to say and give anything away, but read Sister Song, definitely. So that's British folklore, and yeah, very interested in that. And I love to read a bit of Norse mythology as well. And I know that it's a Genevieve, I've forgotten her surname. She wrote The Witch's Heart, which is really Norse mythology retelling.
Well, I totally second that about Sister Song as well, by the way. Who knows, next book club, you guys. I think we should round it off with one more question, really. We don't want to keep you too long. So is there anything else, Cassandra, at all? Give it a minute, and I'm going to have a little look through my notes, see if there's anything else that I think is a good way to round it off.
Nothing has come in yet.
Okay, so in that case, this is quite a good, we got one. Do you think that the women who are killed immediately are the lucky ones? So Polyxena, Iphigenia, there are a few characters who kind of escape all the tragedy of the book by being executed, essentially, which is a horrible way to go, but there's this kind of, I don't know, yeah.
So that is something that Electra says in the novel, that like on her wedding day, she thinks of Iphigenia's wedding day, which did not turn out that way. And she thinks Iphigenia was the lucky one because she got to die and she didn't have to live with all of this horror. But I do not agree with Electra on many things. And that is one of them in particular, because I think that as much as she might say that, I don't think at heart she really believes it, because I think, like Clytemnestra, like Cassandra, despite everything that they have suffered, they have got this incredible will to carry on. And I don't think that you have that will to carry on if you don't have some kind of hope that the world can be a better place. And they do everything they can to make it that way. So I think that, I think that that Iphigenia would have been luckier if she could have, if perhaps some of the other myths were the true version of Iphigenia, that she gets swept away at the altar by Artemis and she gets to go on and lead another life somewhere else. Because I think that as much as I might have written some really tragic stories, I think I always have hope that things can turn out better.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh, well, there we have it. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think Iphigenia and Taurus, there's a whole other myth which you referenced in Electra.
So interesting.
She could have had it all. She could have been a boss queen. She could have been like, yeah, powerful lady. Okay, well, Jennifer, we could probably stay here. I could keep talking about this for hours. I'm having the time of my life, honestly. But we're going to have to round things up and end for today. This has been so enjoyable. I hope you had a wonderful time, and thank you everyone for coming. This has been great. Yeah. So I think, yeah, are we okay to end it? I will briefly say Jennifer does have a new book coming out next year, Atalanta. Yes.
That's right.
With a lot to do with Artemis in it. Yeah.
That's right. And kind of a little bit of the lighter side of Greek mythology. And so Atalanta is a woman who gets to have some of the same adventures that the Greek heroes get to have. So that was, I think there's a really different tone, and hopefully people will really enjoy it.
There we go. Not all tragedy, as you were just saying. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes. So, and just to let you all know, Save Ancient Studies, we do book clubs every month. We've done one with Jennifer before, and as I'm going to say, it would be lovely to have you back again next year to talk about Atalanta when it comes out. So please do make sure to follow us on social media and stay tuned for our October book month, which is yet to be decided. So thank you very much, Jennifer. All right, I think we should end